Hi friends, in this video I will present 6 MCQs on stroke, subarachnoid hemorrhage and AV malformations. So let's begin. MCQ 005. A 50-year-old man with no comorbidity was admitted to the medicine ward with complaints of intermittent night sweats, myalgia and progressive headache for the past 2 weeks. His vital signs and neurological examinations were within normal limit at the time of admission. A lumbar puncture was done and CSF analysis showed neutrophilic pleocytosis, glucose 48 and protein 55 mg per deciliter. Infectious meningitis was suspected and vancomycin, ceftriaxone and acyclovir combinations were started. Next day after the lumbar puncture, the patient developed inability to speak and right facial weakness. A NCCT brain demonstrated a stroke. Later 2D echo was performed which showed vegetations on the anterior leaflets of the mitral valve and mitral valve regurgitation. What is the next best step in the management? A. Escalate the antibiotics. B. Start anticoagulation with heparin. C. The patient should undergo early mitral valve replacement. D. The patient should undergo early mitral valve repair. Or E. Current antibiotics should remain the same. What's your answer? So this is a very interesting question, and the infectious meningitis was suspected based on CSF analysis. Patient was started on usual antibiotics for infectious and meningitis, and later they found the mitral valve problem, the leaflets, there was a vegetation and also regurgitation was there on Doppler echocardiography. So what's your answer to this question regarding the best step in the management? So answer is current antibiotics should remain the same. Now let me explain this to you. So this is a special type of stroke which is related to infective emboli obstructing the branches of middle cerebral arteries and causing infarct in a specific region of the brain. And the source of this emboli is nothing but the vegetations on the anterior mitral valve leaflets. Okay, this was the source of emboli, the vegetations, and these vegetations are infective vegetations. Okay, so we have to do something. So they are asking about whether we should do the mitral valve surgery, early mitral valve surgery or not. So let me answer this. So this is a very interesting case where infective endocarditis was the cause of stroke. Patient was incidentally diagnosed as MR on echocardiography, as well as vegetations were also there. However, patient was not having any cardiovascular system related to infective endocarditis. Okay, so patient was able to tolerate this MR. So problem is that there is a neurological sequelae to this because of this infective endocarditis. Okay, so if there is an infective cause, the antibiotics are the mainstay of the management. So already we have started the specific antibiotics. I think the broad spectrum antibiotic, and most common cause of infective endocarditis, community acquired infective endocarditis is Staph aureus. So already being covered with injection vancomycin in this case. Now the question is whether we should be doing surgery or not. So obviously the surgery is not indicated early in this case because that will cause more problem, that will cause more showering, more chipping off the thrombus and formation of various emboli and obstructing various other parts of brain, and that can worsen the neurological outcome. So that's not advisable. But there are very specific criteria given by American Heart Association. So there are 5 criteria where you should do the early intervention, the surgical intervention. So the first is the valve dysfunction causing symptoms or signs of heart failure, which is not the case in this question, or the paravalvular extension of the vegetation or development of annular or aortic abscess due to infective endocarditis, or there is a destructive or penetrating lesion causing heart block. So in this case there is no ECG given, but the question says the vitals were normal, so we assume that there is no heart block. The destructive or penetrating lesion causing heart block is ruled out. Then infection from difficult to treat pathogens such as fungal or highly resistant organism is also one of the criteria where we should be intervening early. Okay, but we have to wait for the blood culture in this case. If the patient is not responding to appropriate initial antibiotics and the infection is persisting, then also we should be doing the source control. So the answer is the current antibiotics should remain the same. We should wait for at least 2 to 3 days, and if the fever is not subsiding or the counts are very high or patient is looking toxic, then we can escalate the antibiotics. And regarding the anticoagulation, these types of strokes which are caused by infective endocarditis are having high propensity to bleed, so better not to start anticoagulation in this case. A 65-year-old man with hypertension presented to emergency department with acute onset within the last 60 minutes, left face, arm and leg weakness. A NCCT brain does not show any hemorrhage or any ischemic change in the brain. His vital signs are blood pressure 175 upon 110 millimeter of mercury, heart rate 76 and SpO2 98 on room air. Random blood sugar was 127 milligram per deciliter, but other labs are pending. What is the next best step in the management for the patient? A. Administration of tissue plasminogen activator TPA. B. Wait for coagulation profile and platelet count before treatment. C. Place a central line prior to administration of TPA. D. Administer loading dose of aspirin. Or E. Administration of labetalol 10 mg IV push to control blood pressure. What's your answer over here? What will you do? So this is a case of stroke, but only problem over here is that the blood pressure is very high because this is a chronic hypertensive patient. The blood pressure is very high at the time of admission. The sugars are normal, vitals otherwise normal. Okay, so answer is administration of labetalol 10 mg IV push to control blood pressure. So we should know the absolute and relative contraindications to TPA administration or fibrinolysis. So this patient is in the window period for the IV thrombolysis. So they say we can give up to 3 hours, an extended period up to 4.5 hours or even 6 hours of symptom onset, stroke onset. So we have to administer labetalol and maintain that blood pressure between less than 185 110 millimeter of mercury for at least 24 hours after TPA administration also. Otherwise the chances of hemorrhagic transformation of ischemia is very high. A 54-year-old woman suffered aneurysmal SAH from right middle cerebral artery aneurysm, which was secured, and patient is now in neuro ICU since last 6 days. Neuromonitoring is being performed through external ventricular drain, brain tissue oxygenation monitor and microdialysis catheter since admission. However, recordings from the previous day shows PbTO2, that is partial pressure of brain tissue oxygen to be consistently greater than 25 millimeter of mercury, and lactate to pyruvate ratio or LPR is always less than 35. While her most recent findings from this morning are noted in the table that follows. 7 am to 11 am every hour the parameters are given. So please observe these parameters now. And the question is, what is the next step in the management to reduce the patient's risk of delayed cerebral ischemia? So options are: continue to maintain increased cerebral perfusion pressure, that is CPP. B. Start continuous electroencephalogram monitoring. C. Targeted temperature management. D. Transfuse 1 unit of packed red cell. So answer is continue to maintain increased cerebral perfusion pressure. So that is the answer. Now let me explain to you. So remember, the common cause of morbidity and mortality in SAH is delayed cerebral ischemia because of vasospasm of large arteries in the base of brain. Okay, so that is the main cause. Prevention is always better, so that is why we start nimodipine and optimize the blood volume by maintaining the volume status, and also cardiac performance by improving the cardiac output or cardiac index. And that is why the monitoring is decided by WFNS, that is World Federation of Neurological Surgeons, grades of SAH. If the patient is in the early grade or good grades from grade 1 to grade 3, then clinical monitoring as well as the transcranial Doppler and CT angiography is enough. Okay, so there is no need for continuous monitoring in the early grades or good grades because the outcomes are good. But if the patient is presenting with poor grade, okay, then advanced monitoring is the must. Okay, so in this case advanced monitoring has to be performed. So various components of brain multimodality monitoring for poor grade SAH, grade 4 and grade 5 of SAH have been described, like continuous electroencephalography, transcranial Doppler ultrasound, cerebral blood flow monitor, and jugular venous oximetry, brain tissue oxygen tension, and cerebral microdialysis is also advisable. So in continuous electroencephalography, we look at the alpha delta ratio and epileptic form discharges, so that is not going to be discussed here. And in brain tissue oxygen monitoring, PbTO2 level has to be seen, has to be monitored and kept at least above 35 millimeter of mercury. And cerebral microdialysis is a very good modality and in which the glucose, lactate pyruvate ratio, glutamate all must be monitored, and normal range should be maintained. There is an intracranial triple bolt which is inserted by a neurosurgeon in the right frontal region 2 centimeter deep. Okay, so from this bolt we will be monitoring the 3 parameters. So the first parameter is the ICP, intracranial pressure. Okay, so that is based on Codman because we are directly inside the tissue. So Codman monitor will give you ICP value. Okay, and based on ICP and MAP you can measure cerebral perfusion pressure. Then from the second line you can get the brain tissue oxygen level, that is PbTO2 on a monitor. Okay, from the third line is for the cerebral microdialysis. Low glucose or high lactate or high LPR are associated with bad neurological outcome. Even glutamate is very, very important. The glutamate is a early marker of the onset of vasospasm followed by lactate, LPR and glycerol. So glutamate is very sensitive marker of vasospasm. A 47-year-old male with hypertension on irregular treatment developed loss of consciousness while at home and an episode of emesis, following which he was brought to emergency, where urgent NCCT brain showed high grade SAH with IVH. Signs of hydrocephalus were also present. A CT angiogram demonstrated a 6 mm fusiform aneurysm from the distal right PICA. He was admitted to intensive care unit and medical management including tranexamic acid was started. Okay. However, within 12 hours, neurological worsening was noted with an acute increase in ICP, and on opening the EVD, blood was drained. Which of the following is inappropriate about the aneurysmal re-rupture? Aneurysm re-rupture significantly impact functional outcome of those who survive. Independent predictors of rebleeding are Hunt-Hess grade on admission and maximal aneurysm diameter. The use of tranexamic acid decreases the risk of rebleeding. Placement of an EVD decreases the risk of rebleeding. Re-rupture occurs most frequently on the day of SAH. So answer is replacement of an EVD decreases the risk of rebleeding. Actually, it increases the risk of rebleeding. So let me explain. So what are the predictors and impact of aneurysm rebleeding after subarachnoid hemorrhage? So this is a good original investigation in which they found that about 7% of the patients, SAH patients, suffer rebleeding after SAH. Most of the cases of rebleed occur between 3rd or 5th day of the admission. But they have also found the maximum case occurred on 1st day. Independent predictors of rebleeding are Hunt-Hess grade on admission, OR 1.9, and maximal aneurysm diameter. So these two are the independent predictors of rebleeding: Hunt-Hess grade on admission and maximal aneurysm diameter. Okay. Rebleeding is associated with a markedly reduced chance of survival and functional independence at 3 months. So it's quite clinically important. A study they found, which was done in 2015 and published in Stroke, they found that the EVD placement was independently associated with rebleeding within 24 hours. Now question number 9. A 70-year-old male presented to the emergency department with complaints of left-sided numbness and weakness. Similar event occurred one day back for 30 minutes, followed by complete recovery. Head CT and MRI showed no abnormality. A magnetic resonance angiogram of head and neck revealed severe stenosis of right MCA. What is the next best step in the management? A. Placement of a stent across right MCA stenosis. B. Rapid IV heparinization. C. Start dual antiplatelet therapy with aspirin and clopidogrel. D. Start single antiplatelet therapy with aspirin following a loading dose. So what's your answer? The answer is start dual antiplatelet therapy with aspirin and clopidogrel. So this question is based on a popular trial. Basically, this trial was Sampras trial done in 2011, published in NEJM. So in this case, the diagnosis is crescendo transient ischemic attack and causes severe stenosis of right MCA. This study shows a good outcome with medical management alone. So the answer to the question which is asked in this MCQ is the medical management. Now regarding whether to start dual antiplatelet or single antiplatelet, so another trial was performed which is called CHANCE trial. Okay, the CHANCE trial showed that the dual antiplatelet therapy is better than the single antiplatelet therapy. So this is the last MCQ. A 55-year-old man was brought by brother to emergency department with complaints of altered mental status. He had no previous comorbidity. He was suffering with headache and confusion since last 2 days. A non-contrast CT brain showed a right frontoparietal intraparenchymal hemorrhage. Diagnostic cerebral angiography was performed which revealed AV malformation as shown in the following figure. Which of the following statement is true regarding AVM in this patient? A. AVMs are the most common cause of intracranial hemorrhage. B. Risk of rebleeding is very low in this AVM. C. Urgent surgery is the mainstay of treatment in this case. D. AVMs are classically congenital and increase the lifetime risk of seizure and intracerebral hemorrhage. So AVMs are classically congenital and increase the lifetime risk of seizure and intracerebral hemorrhage is the correct answer. And we should know few facts regarding the cerebral arteriovenous malformation. So as you know that arteriovenous malformations or AVMs are developmental anomaly of the vascular system consisting of tangles of poorly formed blood vessels in which the feeding arteries are directly connected to venous drainage network without any interspersed capillary system, and only 12% of AVMs are estimated to become symptomatic. 88% of the AVMs are asymptomatic if they are found in the brain. So AVMs cause neurological dysfunction through varieties of pathophysiological mechanisms, like they can bleed, they can cause mass effect and can lead to seizure, and very specific steal phenomena can happen where the blood flow is diverted to the AVM, and the normal areas of brain around AVM get hypoperfused, and which can cause progressive neurological deficit. However, cerebral angiography is the gold standard for a diagnosis and treatment planning. Invasive management is always recommended for the younger patients, whereas medical management is favored in the older individuals. History of the previous rupture is one of the most significant risk factors that predicts the long-term bleeding risk. SMG scale is commonly employed for the assessment and the risk of surgical morbidity and mortality with brain AVMs. Higher the grade, more morbidity and mortality after brain AVMs. So you should know these facts, which are very, very important and probably will be enabling to you to tackle these kind of questions on cerebral AVMs. So that's all. Thank you. Follow next video on neurocritical care MCQs.